Well, we're all here together to talk about a poem by Emily Dickinson. It's number 952, and it's called A Man May Make a Remark. I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it in 5 minutes somehow. A man may make a remark, in itself a quiet thing, that may furnish the fuse unto a spark in dormant nature lain. Let us deport with skill. Let us discourse with care. Powder exists in charcoal before it exists in fire. Gabe, how would we, is there a paraphrase of this argument? She's making a case, I think, isn't she?
I think so. Well, let's see how I do. I think what she's saying is a remark, though it seems like such a minor thing, can activate so much. And we may not, really. Fire, yeah. And we may not see that fire could come from it, which is what I think is going on in that last line. Powder exists in charcoal before it exists in fire. That the kind of that intense energy can come from something that doesn't seem like it'll put that into the world, but a remark can really activate it.
Great. And Emily, so what is she's recommending in the first two lines of the second stanza that we change our behavior in this context? What's she recommending?
Right. It seems like she's suggesting that we should approach conversation with extreme care and even caution.
Mm-hmm. So, Max, a man may make a remark meaning a statement, language. So, given what Emily just said, let us deport with skill, let us discourse. She's basically saying, be careful, language has consequences, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's incendiary, right? Literally here. It's language can cause a spark, it can cause a fire.
Molly, this is so unusual for Emily Dickinson because normally she would say, yeah, language has consequences, so let's blow the place up with language. But she's recommending skill and care. Might that have to do with the author of the remark, a man, capital M?
I wondered that. I wrote specifically a man. Yeah, very much. And the in dormant nature lane kind of tells us that this may be something that's building this fire over a long period of time, and one little thing can set it off.
Lily, it suggests, if we're reading this right, that the making of remarks that don't respect the power of language and the consequences of language could be associated with the male language, or a man as opposed to a woman making the remark, if that's possible. So then her suggesting these more gendered, the care, thoughtfulness, skill, is less of a stereotype of a woman's response to that than a kind of counter-argument that she's making about irresponsibility. Does that make any sense?
I think it depends on who you read to be included in us. And, this could be a poem from the perspective of an annoying man who is, saying, well, I don't want to say something that may upset the ladies in the room. It's so open, you could read it in so many different, we don't know who the speaker is, we don't know who's included in us.
Mm-hmm. Amber Rose and Anna, I think this poem proposes a kind of theory of language as power. I wonder if we can say what that theory might be. Theory of language as power. I mean, that's Dickinson's theme a lot of the time. Either one of you want to start on that, Amber Rose?
I think that's an argument that a lot of poets make, right? Some folks can maybe think, detractors of poetry can maybe think that poems are inconsequential or that language is inconsequential. But what Dickinson is trying to bring to light here is that there are very concrete impacts that language can make, and we have to consider that language and speech acts can actually change things.
Speech acts is a key phrase here. Anna?
Yeah, I would argue that we could read remark, substitute the word remark for the word poem. And, Gabe and Max have both said that language is incendiary, language has effects, language has impacts. Well, so do poems. And a poem, deporting with skill, discoursing with care, this is a poem that has a particular sort of meter and structure, and it's participating in a certain kind of poetic discourse and poetic tradition. I think you could certainly argue that this poem itself is a poem about activation, just as it itself activates.
I like that word too. Allie, Davy, and Dave. So the last two lines. It sort of theorizes where the power lies and how latent it is. And there's a kind of implicit analogy to words. So we have the thought of a word, the word that you could use without skill. It's already in your head prior to whether you use skill or care for it. So the interiorizing thinking of the word is to the word that gets said and it has an effect, as powder in charcoal is to fire, something like that. Davy, you start. What do you do with those last two lines? What kind of theory of language is it?
It's a theory of language that makes the effect of language not necessarily traceable, but understands that the language that you use can and will have a tremendous effect that you might not be able to trace, might not be able to see, that might be positive or negative. Fire isn't, I don't read fire in this poem as necessarily a problem, that there might be, as there is with fire as a chemical and material process, uses of fire that are necessary and effective and uses of fire that are destructive and problematic. And I understand it to be championing the curation of language, of being careful with language, not so that it doesn't...
Even prior to its becoming fire.
Not so that it doesn't create fire, but so that it attends to the work that fire does.
Ah, that's great. Dave, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I see this poem as kind of a threat, actually. It's like Chekhov's gun. It's like, I'm just going to come in, put this loaded gun on the table, and just not say anything about it, but it's there. It's always there.
And that's language. Mm-hmm. Allie?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a piece of charcoal, which doesn't typically, there's something social about charcoal making fire. Like there's got to be like a bunch of different pieces of charcoal, I think. And so there's this idea of like this incendiary remark, whatever actually is the particular thing that lights the fuse, could actually be, might even be arbitrary, and that this latent thing is like the remark may do it, but it's like in the social body, perhaps, like, yeah, I'm not sure how to finish that.
Well, no, this is good.
Yeah.
I think that while she seems to be recommending the use of language with skill and care, it's not clear whether she's advocating it simply. But one thing we know about this poem, for instance, is that it is the opposite of careless and the opposite of skillless. And so she's doing in the poem exactly what she's recommending, and therefore her poem can have power, but it's in that latency that we have to care about and not so much worrying about the fire itself. Thank you all. This was great.
If you liked this episode, watch another and subscribe.
And join us for ModPo, a free and open course at modpo.org.